Hi class. We're going to talk more about cell transport today. Last time we talked about active and passive transport. Passive transport does not require energy and moves things from high concentration to low concentration. Today we're going to focus on osmosis, which is a type of passive transport. It's really important in cells. Let's recap what osmosis is. It is the movement of water across a cell membrane from where there's a lot of water to where there's less water. So from high concentration to low concentration of water. Different kinds of solute have an impact on osmosis. In this picture, that's some strawberries with some sugar put on top. And the sugar is going to draw the water out of the cells by osmosis because the sugar is a solute. And the solute has an effect on whether water is going to move into cells or out by osmosis. Tonicity is a comparison of the amount of solute that is on opposite sides of the membrane. These are comparison words. So if you're talking about one side, it's compared to the other side. There's always a comparison that you're going to look at. And this is going to tell us where water is going to move, into or out of cells. A reminder, water always moves toward areas of higher solute concentration. So where there is more solute, more dissolved materials, that's where the water is going to be headed. So the choices of tonicity are called hypotonic, isotonic, or hypertonic. These all start with a little prefix. And those prefixes help to explain what kind of solution it is that we're looking at. So if something is hypotonic, hypo means less. So hypotonic, there is less dissolved material outside the cell. We're talking about the solution, which is the outside of the cell. In comparison, the cell must be hypertonic. Hyper means more. So a hypertonic solution is going to have more dissolved materials outside the cell. Since it's a comparison word, again, the cell here would be hypotonic. It's like comparing someone that's taller versus shorter. You have to have something to compare it to or it doesn't really make any sense. Iso means same. So isotonic means that there's the same amount of solute concentration inside and outside of a cell. We're going to look at these a little more in depth. Osmosis works differently in plant versus animal cells because of the cell wall. The cell wall provides an additional layer of structure and support for plant and fungi cells and other kinds of cells too, but not for animal cells. They do not have a cell wall, you'll remember. So the bottom part of this diagram shows when there's a plant cell that has a wall. The plant cell can't change shape too much. Animal cells, though, because they don't have that extra layer of support, can change their shape quite drastically, as you can see there. And we're going to look at how different solutions impact water moving in and out and what that does to the shape of those cells. All right, so we're going to start with isotonic. Isotonic means same strength. So iso is same in these solutions. We're talking about the inside and the outside of the cell being the concentration is equal on both sides. So inside the cell in the diagram, there's 10% salt, which means 90% water. And then outside, in the beaker in this case, it's 10% salt and 90% water. When that's the case, water is going to move in and out of the cell. It doesn't just not move, it still moves, but it moves equally in both directions, so you don't see really any change in the cell. This has a different effect on plant cells than it does on animal cells. So looking at the plant cell, it has that cell wall, so it can't change size too much. Plant cells that are in an isotonic solution are what is called flaccid. That means water is going in and water is going out. Plant cells never want water to go out. They want the water to stay in all the time. Plants do not enjoy an isotonic solution, and in that case, they actually get kind of wilted and unhealthy. Isotonic solution in animals, though, is the normal way of living. This is how animal cells want to be. They want to be in an isotonic solution with some water going in, some water going out. All right, so this says their normal happy state for animal cells. Our next choice for tonicity is going to be a hypotonic solution. So again, if we're talking about the solution, we're talking about outside of the cell. So outside of the cell here, it says 10% salt. Right. Compared to inside of the cell, there's 20% salt. So the cell is saltier than the solution outside. Right. That's what hypotonic means, less dissolved materials on the outside. Whenever there is a hypotonic solution, water is going to move into the cell. A little way you can remember that is hypo, in you go. If it's a hypotonic solution, water is going to go into that cell. And again, it's going to have a different effect on plants and animals. Plant cells, again, have that cell wall. So when water is moving in a hypotonic solution, water is moving into these cells. In an animal cell, they don't have a wall. So if water moves in and in and in a hypotonic solution, eventually the pressure will build up in there and it will actually burst through the cell membrane. We call this cytolysis. It means cell breaking or cell cutting. It bursts open. This is not good for cells. You do not want your cells bursting open. Plants, on the other hand, have a wall, so they cannot burst. It's like filling a 2-liter bottle of water. Once you have all the water full, it can't go anymore. It just won't take any more water. A balloon, like an animal cell, will just pop. The bottle, because it has this rigid, like a cell wall kind of covering, eventually it just won't take any more water. That is called turgid. And you can see how these cells are big and fat and full of water. Their central vacuoles are taking up a huge area. This is how plant cells want to exist. This is their natural state of happy living. You can see this plant in the picture here is nice and healthy and standing up straight. The word for that is turgid. Sounds sort of like rigid. Our next choice is hypertonic solution. So hypertonic, as we already said below, hyper means above strength. So it's going to be stronger, more dissolved materials. So in this case, the outside is 20% salt and the inside is only 10% salt. Outside, there's more dissolved materials. So when you have cells in a hypertonic solution, the water is going to move out of those cells. Again, this has a different effect when you're looking at plants versus animals. An animal cell, because it doesn't have any big supporting structure around its outside, it can shrivel up, and that's exactly what it does. When all the water is going out, because it's in a hypertonic solution, it shrinks up. We call that crenation. That's the shrinking of the animal cells. And these are red blood cells, again, that you're looking at there. That's what RBC is. Plant cells, though, they do have a wall. In the other pictures, remember, they were big and fat. In this case, the wall just gets kind of caved in. It doesn't go away, so it's still kind of rectangular, but it does change shape as the water leaves. So the water goes out, the vacuole shrinks up, the plasma membrane shrinks up, and we get what's called plasmolysis. All the stuff that belongs in that cell is now in this little circle that the plasma membrane has shrunk to. Obviously, this plant is in sad shape. Plant cells, well, really no cells, but plant cells do not enjoy being in a hypertonic solution. That's why you can't water them with salt water. Here's a little GIF about osmosis in red blood cells. Red blood cells are oftentimes used as an example of animal cells. It is, again, passive transport. No energy is being required here. It just happens by itself. Hypotonic, hypo, in you go. The water's moving in by osmosis, and that red blood cell is blowing up. If that continues to happen, it will literally explode. Isotonic, this is where the cell is good and happy. Hypertonic, water's moving out, and the cell is shriveling up. That's crenation. Here's the red blood cells we just looked at and what they're doing. Here's the names are printed on there for you. This one is showing the plant cell, and here are some actual microscope pictures of that in an isotonic solution. So this is like a wilted plant. Water in and out, plants don't like that. Plants prefer water in. They like to be turgid and puffed up and rigid and strong. And then there's plasmolized, which is where the cell membrane is shrunken. These are some real-world examples of osmosis and how they affect organisms. Bacteria and plants have the cell walls that gives them that turgor pressure we talked about being turgid. Protists actually live in water, a lot of them, and they have water going into their cells all the time, but they can't just be exploding. So they actually have what's called a contractile vacuole, and you can see there on the diagram there. I have right here, little contractile vacuoles that fill up with water, and then when they're full, they squeeze it back out into the pond or wherever it is that they live. Animals also have adaptations to allow them to deal with that. Saltwater fish have gills that work in a special way to deal with the salt from the salt water. And then mammals like ourselves, our blood needs to be kept isotonic to our cells, and our kidneys luckily are going to deal with that for us. A couple more real world examples. This happens all the time here in Ohio. In the winter, the city is going to salt the streets, and when that happens, all the salt, the extra salt, flies over onto the tree lawns, and it creates, with the water that's present there, it creates a hypertonic solution. In a hypertonic solution, the water is all going to flow out of the grass. It's going to dry up and die. The top one is about animal cells again. If you're getting an IV and they're putting a liquid directly into your body and it's going to bathe your blood cells and come in contact with your other cells, they need to make sure that they are giving you an isotonic solution so that your cells don't either explode or shrink because the water's moving in or out. Osmosis really is a really important process for living things.